Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm going to bring you my YALC TBR. So if you don't know what YALC is, it is the Young Adult Literature Convention, and it's held every year in London at the end of July as part of London Film and Comic Con. So YALC is kind of like YA Christmas because it brings together authors and publishers and readers, and they do events and signings, and there are publishers there with lots of books and book stands. There's a Waterstone stand. It's just an amazing time, especially if you are a blogger or a booktuber who has sort of friends online but have never met in real life. It's a great opportunity to actually meet people. I was lucky enough to go to YALC last year, and I really enjoyed myself. So I'm going again this year, and I feel like this year I'm going to be better prepared. One of the reasons I'm going to be better prepared is because I'm actually going to do a TBR. So because there are so many authors who are going to be there, there's also a lot of authors whose books I have never read, and I happen to own a lot of those books already, so this is a great chance to clear off my shelf a little bit and to read some new authors. So my TBR for YALC is about 18 or so books long, so I've decided to split this up into 3 parts. So I have high priority reads. Those are obviously the ones that I am the most excited to get to and that I really want to read before YALC. Then I have my medium priorities and my low priority reads. Now, just because something is on the low priority shelf doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad book or a book that I'm not excited about. It's just that it's one that I would like to get to if I can, but I'm not going to be hugely fussed about if I don't. So let's go ahead and get started with the high priority reads. So the first on my list for high priority books for YALC is The Exact Opposite of Okay, and this is by Laura Stephen. Now this book was actually available as a proof at YALC last year, and I was so close to getting it so many times. They did like a call out on Twitter, and they would say, you know, we have 3 copies of this available to the first 3 people who show up at our stand and ask for it, and I would always be like the 4th or 5th person, and it got to the point where they were kind of like giggling along with me because it was so ridiculous. I kept being so close. The Exact Opposite of Okay is all about sort of slut shaming and feminism and girl power and kind of overcoming all this stupid stuff that teenagers now have to deal with. So this next book I actually would not count as a young adult book. It's one that I feel definitely falls more into the adult fantasy genre, but this author was there last year and was absolutely lovely, and he's gonna be there again this year. So this is Ravencry, and this is by Ed McDonald. So this is the US cover, this is the UK cover. I like the UK one so much more. If I could show you. There we go. Black Wing was his debut novel of last year, and I absolutely loved it. Ravencry takes place in a sort of post-apocalyptic type world. There's been this huge war between sort of gods and mortals, and there have been demigods who've been kind of helping out, and just all of this craziness has happened in the past, and it's essentially broken the land. There's this area called the Misery, which I always talk about when I talk about this book because it's one of my favorite fantasy settings just ever. It's this place where sort of magic has destroyed the world so much that like the sky has cracks in it, you can't navigate through it. There are these horrifying creatures that sort of live in it, and it's this just amazing setting. I don't want to talk about Ravencry too much because it's definitely going to spoil the events of Black Wing for anyone who hasn't read it, but I really highly encourage you to read it if you like sort of anything with a Western type setting, anything that's got a really strong magic system, anything that you really want strong relationships between the characters. There are amazing male characters, there are amazing female characters, there are amazing friendships between men and women, and it's a great book. I really loved it. Next up in the high priorities list, there is a book that is the last book in a trilogy, and I have been wanting to read this for ages. I even went to the launch of this book, and I got all 3 of those books signed, and I still haven't managed to get to it, and it's really annoying me. So this is Hero at the Fall, and this is by Elwyn Hamilton. I feel like I'm saying this constantly, but I'm gonna say it again. Rebel of the Sands is the book that got me actually reading young adult. It's not the first young adult book that I ever read, but it's the first one that I read that made me want more. So I really appreciate this series. I owe a lot to this series. I really like Elwyn Hamilton as a writer and also as a person because she's, again, a lovely person like all these authors seem to be, and I'm really excited to see just what happens at the end of this trilogy. I really like the first book. I love the second book, so I really want to know what's going to happen here. I have a feeling she's going to try to break our hearts, which I absolutely love. I love it when authors do that. I love a bittersweet ending, so I'm really looking forward to this. So next up we've got another contemporary YA book. And now I don't read a lot of contemporary YA because it's just not something that interests me much. I can't necessarily relate to the characters, but I do really enjoy contemporary books when they have a very interesting spin to them. And I really like this author. Again, she's lovely. She's a great champion of other people's books, which I think is a wonderful thing. She kind of like epitomizes how wonderful British YA authors can be. And she's also a fellow Californian, so of course I have to support her. This is Wing Jones, and this is by Catherine Weber. So Wing Jones follows a girl who's kind of at a crossroads in her life. Something, I don't know what because I haven't read it yet, happens, and her way of sort of working through her feelings and working out these complications in her life is by running. And this sounds like a really wonderful book. So next up is a book of historical fiction, and this is a review copy that I'm particularly interested in. I know almost nothing about it, and if you've watched my April book haul, you've already seen me talk about this book before, so I'll keep it a little bit short, but this is The Electrical Venus, and this is by Julie Mayhew. So I've heard that this book is really good for fans of The Night Circus, which is a book I read ages ago, and I did like at the time, and I am very, very curious to see what this book is like. The Electrical Venus follows a girl named Mim, and she is a performer in a traveling sideshow in Georgian England, and one day she gets top billing as the Electrical Venus. That's basically all I know about this one. I think that it's going to be a really fascinating read. I think it might be one of those books that sort of borders on fantasy and magical realism, so I'm looking forward to this. I'd really like to see what this is like. I've never read anything by this author before, so I'm very curious. Continuing on with the theme of lovely authors, this is another author that I've never read before, but I really, really like her. Again, she's a great sort of advocate for other people's books. She sounds like a really interesting woman, and I've heard amazing, amazing things about this. So this is Gilded Cage, and this is by Vic James. Gilded Cage is a book that I'm really curious about because it sounds almost historical in the fact that it sounds very Industrial Revolution to me, but it also is a modern setting, and it also contains magic in it as well. So Gilded Cage is about a version of Britain where the aristocracy has magical powers and the sort of more common people do not. And the common people have to kind of enter into like an indentured servitude. They have to serve the aristocracy for 10 years. It's an involuntary thing. So this book follows a woman named Abby, and she has to serve this very ruthless aristocratic family, and her brother Luke is sort of forced into a factory setting for their 10 years of service. This book that seems really, really compelling to me. I don't know what it is. I don't know much about it, but I just keep staring at it and I want to read it, and it's time that I actually get around to it, especially because I think the third book comes out this year maybe, or it comes out quite soon. So this trilogy is gonna wrap up and I really need to get my butt moving. So the second to last book on my list of high priorities is one I've been holding on to for a very, very long time, and this is the perfect opportunity to get it read. So this is A Skinful of Shadows, and this is by Frances Hardinge. So The Lie Tree by Frances Hardinge is one of my favorite books ever. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and that was really my introduction to YA. Even though I didn't go and seek out YA after that, I just thought it was a fantastic example of YA writing. Frances Hardinge writes these very kind of strange magical realism books. So The Lie Tree is sort of historical fiction mixed with magical realism, and this feels like it's much more on the fantasy side of magical realism. So as far as I can tell, and I feel like the copy for this book is quite vague, which I really, really appreciate. I really like that. This book is about a young woman named Makepeace, and she is kind of constantly fighting off possession by ghosts, and one day a ghost gets to her, and it's a very kind of brutal spirit, and it's all about her kind of trying to escape that, I suppose. I will honestly read anything that Frances Hardinge writes, even though I've only read the one book by her. She's an author who I really want to explore more, and she certainly has quite the backlist. I'd really, really like to sink my teeth into more books by her, and I think this is going to be a great place to start. This next book is already signed, and it is a hardcover edition rather than the standard paperback edition that the UK got. And I really love the cover, I really love the premise, and I think that this is going to be one that I absolutely love. So this is The Hazelwood, and this is by Melissa Albert. So The Hazelwood is all about a girl named Alice, and she and her mum have kind of always been on the run for as long as she can remember. And Alice's grandmother is like a cult fairy tale author. She wrote these very sort of strange and twisted fairy tales and got this huge following, and she lives as a recluse on her estate called the Hazelwood. So when Alice's grandmother dies, her mother disappears shortly afterwards, and to find out what happened to her mother, Alice has to go to the Hazelwood, which is a place she's been banned from by her mother. Her mother tells her to never go there. And she finds out that these fairy tales that her grandmother had written were not fiction at all. These are actually real. I don't know why I've been putting off reading this book. For some reason, it's just slipped lower and lower on my list of priorities, but now is the time to get to it. I really, really, really want to have this done before YALC. Next is my list of medium priorities. Now these are books that I all really want to read, but those other ones take a slightly higher preference for me. So the very first book that I have here is The Smoke Thieves by Sally Green, and you cannot see this cover because it is basically just all white. Sally Green wrote a trilogy called Half Bad, which I'm sure you all know, a few years ago, I believe, and it's one that I have not read, but it's one I know divides people pretty seriously. You either love Half Bad or you really do not love Half Bad. So this is her first in a new series. I think it's going to be a trilogy, but I'm not 100% sure. And it's quite complicated from what I know. Again, like most of the books on my TBR, I don't know a whole lot about it, but it features multiple points of view. I think there are 5 characters, and it's all about sort of political maneuvering and trying to save the kingdom and love and romance and all of that great stuff. This is listed as a medium priority for me, even though I really, really, really want to get it done, is because it is quite a long book, it turns out. I believe it's over 500 pages. Just because of time, I am going to leave this one as a medium priority, although I'd really, really like to read it. I'd also like to buy myself a copy at YALC. This next book is another fairy loot book. I believe this one was from December, so it's been a little while. This is Everless by Sarah Holland. Now, Sarah Holland is not signing at YALC, I believe, but she's going to be running a workshop instead, so I just want to get this done anyway. That's the reason this is a medium priority instead of a high priority. I have heard amazing, amazing things about Everless. It's supposed to be fantastic. And one of the reasons that I really trust in a lot of those reviews is that a fair few of them have been from people who don't read fantasy and still loved this. I think that says a lot about this book. Everless takes place in a world in which time is a currency, so you can literally bleed out your life in order to pay for things. And if you get into debt, that might actually just happen to you. This book follows Jules, and she, in order to save her father's life because he is greatly in debt, she takes a job at the Everless estate, which is owned by a very cruel aristocratic family. This is one I've been wanting to read for a long time, but again, for some reason, it has just slipped from my list of priorities, so I'm gonna fix that. Next up, we've got a book that I bought kind of on a whim because it sounded really, really cool, and I had no idea that it was actually going to be a young adult book. So this is one that I'm actually quite excited for. This is Spare and Found Parts, and this is by Sarah Maria Griffin. It sounds kind of like almost like a Frankenstein retelling. It takes place in a world in which a plague has wiped out a huge number of people, and the remaining people need to have parts of their bodies replaced. Our heroine is Nell, and one day she gets the idea to create a companion, essentially, out of these spare parts. This sounds really creepy and really gruesome and absolutely fantastic, and I'm so looking forward to it. So the reason this next book is a medium priority is because I have already read the author's newest book, and I felt like that kind of took care of my high priority reads for her. So this is Rune Marks by Joanne M. Harris. If you have seen my April wrap-up and book haul, you will have already seen me absolutely ranting and raving about how much I love The Testament of Loki and how much I previously loved The Gospel of Loki. They're both fantastic books that I highly, highly recommend. So she is going to be at YALC this year, and I'm so excited! And I really, really wanted to finish up The Testament of Loki before that, and I did. I finished it up last month, and so I am very much looking forward to Rune Marks, but because I've read her newest book, this is going to be sort of when I have the time, I think. So Rune Marks takes place in a sort of classic Norse mythology setting, it sounds like, unlike The Testament of Loki, which takes place in a more modern setting, and it's about a girl named Maddie, who's kind of always been an outsider. She has some unusual abilities, and she has a strange marking on her hand, which I imagine is a rune mark. She learns the way of the old gods, travels to the world below, meets the infamous trickster Loki, who's a wonderful character in these books, and this just sounds like it's going to be a really, really fantastic read. Next up is a book that I don't think needs a whole lot of explanation. So this is Orphan Monster Spy, and this is by Matt Colleen. So this is a historical fiction novel. It takes place during World War II, and it's about a young Jewish girl who's been orphaned, and she ends up having to infiltrate a Nazi boarding school in order to spy on them. I think you can probably tell why I want to read this book. It sounds awesome. I have heard a couple of good reviews for this, and not much more. I really don't know how this book has been received, but it sounds really interesting to me, so I'm very, very curious to read it for myself. The last on my list of medium priorities is a book that has been out for absolute ages, but this author is like the center of British YA, so I really need to read this book, and I really need to read the rest of the books in this series if I enjoy it, because I really like her as a person. Again, all these authors are wonderful people, and I really want to support them, but she's going to be on like all of the panels, and she's going to be like doing all of the great stuff, and all of the signings, and all that, so I really want to read The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This book has been out for ages. It's been out since 2013, and I still have not read it. I've heard sort of mixed reviews about it. I've heard that it's either really complex and people couldn't get into it, or it was just not really for them, or I've heard that people love it and think that it's just fantastic. So I really want to get into this for myself. This book takes place in sort of alternate London. It has this sort of, to me, it feels like it has this kind of post-apocalyptic feel without actually being post-apocalyptic. There's this Scion government who are sort of controlling and oppressing any kind of unnaturalness. So of course our main character is a clairvoyant, and that's something that is very, very much frowned upon. So that's really all I know about this. I really want to read this, but because it's an older book and it's got a whole series behind it, this is going to be one that I would like to get to if I've got the time. So last but not least are my low priority books. Now again, these aren't books that I'm not excited to read. These aren't books that I am like gonna read kicking and screaming or anything like that. These are just books that I am sort of not as excited about, and I think the reason for that is because two of these three are actually contemporary YA, which is not a genre that I usually enjoy. So the very first book is not a contemporary YA. This is actually science fiction, and with the exception of maybe a couple of big booktubers who might have had a little bit of a bias, I have heard absolutely horrible things about this book, and I'm sure some of you can guess what this is just by that description. But almost everyone that I know who has read this says that this book is absolute, just a dumpster fire. So this is Zenith, and this is by Sasha Ellsberg and Lindsay Cummings. I don't know. I have had this since August, and I kept putting it off because it was coming out in January of this year, so I had lots of time, and then reviews started to come in, and they were all bad, like all bad, with the exception of like major booktubers who are friends with these ladies, which is fine. I have heard nothing but bad things about this book. That's the reason that I don't really want to read this. That's the reason it's a low priority, but I've got it. If I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna read it for YALC, because this is going to be like the only time that I have some kind of incentive to read this book. This all was mean. So the next book is a low priority because I did not read the back of it very carefully when I picked it up in the shop, and I'm not 100% sold on the fact that I will enjoy this, but we'll go ahead and see. This is The Truth and Lies of Ella Black, and this is by Emily Barr. This sounds like it is a YA contemporary thriller, which is very exciting. This is not something that I get to read very often, I think. The last one that I read was probably Genuine Fraud by E. Lockhart, which I really did enjoy. So this book is about Ella Black, and she seems to live the life that most other 17-year-olds would kill for, but one day, telling her nothing, her parents whisk her off to Brazil. Determined to find out why, Ella discovers a terrible secret, and she is on the run. This sounds fine. And this one point that I have is super stupid and nitpicky, and I shouldn't be letting this influence my opinion at all, but on the back, the kind of big highlighted sentence is, I call her Bella because she's the dark side of me. It's Ella, but not. It's bad Ella. Bella. Like, calling yourself bad Ella or Bella just sounds so silly and immediately makes me not want to take this book seriously. Like, Bella? Come on, bad Ella, Bella, like, I feel like that's very almost childish in a way, and it's really silly for that to influence my opinion, but it does, so I'll get to this if I can, but I'm not going to be heartbroken if I don't. So ending on a more high note, the last low priority book that I have is actually one that I've heard really, really amazing things about. And this is an author who, again, I really like because she's a great advocate for other people's books, and she seems like a lovely person, very human on Twitter. I feel like I relate to her very, very well in a lot of ways. But it is a genre that, again, I'm not necessarily the most interested in. So this is It Only Happens in the Movies, and this is by Holly Bourne. This book is about when Audrey meets Harry, and Harry seems like this kind of ridiculous, cliched movie-type hero, someone who couldn't possibly exist in real life. And that's not me saying that, that's this book saying that. And she decides to kind of let him in anyway, and this is about their relationship. I actually had the end of this book spoiled for me, and I'm really, really upset at whoever did that. This doesn't really jump out at me as one that I must read, but I think that it might be a good kind of summary type of book. So that should be my YALC TBR. I will probably end up adding to that because they're still, I believe, announcing not author signings, but kind of events that are going to be happening during YALC. So it's 3 days long. I will be there for all 3 days. I'm thinking of doing a sort of YALC survival type video on tips and advice for kind of handling YALC, especially if you are a more shy person like myself. So if you're interested in that, hopefully that'll be coming up soon. So one last thing is, because I have so many books on this TBR, I'm not going to be doing monthly TBR videos, which I haven't done for a little bit, just because they don't really help me all that much. I don't find them useful. I always stray from them, but I think that these are going to be the books that I concentrate on till the end of July. So I might check in from time to time and see how this is going, just to keep myself motivated, but I really do want to read all of these books, otherwise I wouldn't have bought them. So that is it for this video. If you are going to YALC, absolutely please let me know, because I would love to meet some people while I'm there. That's not something that I did much of last year, and I really regret it. So let me know in the comments if you're going to YALC, if you have a TBR for YALC, if you recommend any of these books, if you've got any of these books on your list. If you have a TBR video, I would love to see it. So if you enjoyed this video, I post bookish content here fairly frequently, so definitely hit subscribe, and I will see you soon.